Hey, good morning. Merry Christmas. If we haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Garry. I'm one of the pastors here. Really glad that you decided to spend some of your Sunday morning with us. Great morning to be inside, and just know that we're all in this together, even though we're apart. So make sure you send those pictures in. Keep sending them in. We need some updated ones. Just so make sure you send them in to the address on the screen, media@themeetingplace.org, and we'll get them on that pre-service roll. So make sure you do that. Couple of things I want to just update you on before we get started here. About 3 weeks ago, we had our friend Jeremy Viz Zoom in. He was actually going to come here, but with all the restrictions, he Zoomed in. And we talked about an opportunity that we have as a church to partner with another church in a community in Mexico, in San Juan, Tuija, Mexico, in the state of Chiapas. So very far south of Mexico, right on the Guatemalan border. The long and short of it is that COVID-19 has had a devastating effect on communities and countries where they were already mired in poverty. And so we were offered the opportunity to partner with Compassion and a church in a local community in this town, down in Mexico, so this church could actually continue to love and care for their community, both physically by supplying them with food, sanitary products, things like that, as well as caring for them spiritually, by just letting them know that they're not alone, praying with them, things like that. So we partnered with a couple of other churches to help fund this church for a year. And our goal as our church community is to raise $20,000 by May 2021. And within the 3 weeks that we've launched this, you guys have already donated over $4,000. So we're well on our way. So I want to say thank you for that. Our dream is we're going to have an opportunity once COVID kind of settles down to actually sponsor some children from this community. And then our long-term goal is, this isn't just a monetary thing. We are building, nurturing, and fostering, and building a relationship with this community. That's what we want to do. And so our long-term goal is that when it's safe to travel, we would send a team down to this community every year to just love on them. That's it. That's all we would go down and do. And if you happen to sponsor a child from that community, you would be able to meet your sponsored child. And that is a life-changing experience for both you, if you are the sponsor, and for the child. So that's where we're going. I just wanted to update you on that. If you want to know more, go to themeetingplace.org and scroll down, and you'll see a button that says Compassion Project. You can go on there. You can see how to donate, what the project's all about, what the community's all about, and I would encourage you to do that. Closer to home, you may have heard about the fire downtown on Wesley Street at the homeless camp. It left those that were already kind of just eking by from day to day, not only nowhere to go, but to go somewhere else with nothing because they lost their possessions in this fire. And so a couple of organizations in town here that advocate for them, those people that are living on the street, put the call out to see if people could give them the much needed supplies like sleeping bags, tents, tarps, propane bottles, things like that. So we heard about it, and a couple of people from our community, our church community, said, hey, we'll gather all that stuff, we'll get it down there. And so we did that last week. We were able to deliver all these essentials for these people. And so that's just another way that we're meeting our vision, seeing our vision come to life, where we want to just unleash God's extravagant love on this city. And you guys are doing that. And words can't really convey how much that warms my heart to know that I'm part of a community of people like you. It's people like you that make this church so awesome. So thank you for your generosity, your ongoing generosity. You guys rock, you really do, and it's so awesome to see us, getting involved like that. One last thing, call team update. You may have received an email on Wednesday. Another one went out last night. You may not have opened the email, but here's what it's all about. we all miss you guys. I miss you guys. And so we got some people together and we said, hey, it would be cool if we could just phone people up and say, hey, how are you doing? Is there anything you need prayer for? Can we help you in some way? But just to hear another human voice that's outside your bubble would be kind of cool. And so that's what we decided to do. We assembled this team. They're super eager. They want to get on this because just like me, they're missing you. But what we found was we have lots of emails, but we have very few phone numbers. And so the appeal in that email was if you would like a call, to just send us your information. We promise we won't abuse it in any way. We won't sell it to anyone, anything like that. We just simply want to connect with you, see how you're doing. So if you would like a call, email the best number to reach you at to the address on the screen, admin@themeetingplace.org, and our team, someone from that team, will be getting a hold of you over the next weeks and months until we can start meeting together again. So make sure you do that, okay? All right, so get into the message here. My wife and I, we were living in this neighborhood. We lived there for quite a few years, but we're living in this neighborhood, and right across the street from us, this young family moved in. They had just built a house and all that, so they just moved in. So we didn't really know them. We'd seen them around, but didn't really know them. This couple had 2 young kids, just like us at the time. We have 3 daughters now, but at the time we only had 2. And every morning I would see this mom come out of her front door with her 2 kids, walking them to school. And I remember looking at the kids, and they're all dressed nice, and their hair's done, and they looked happy, and the mom was all done up, like her hair was done, her makeup was on, or she had nice clothes on, and she would just walk these kids off to school. And I remember thinking, man, do they ever have it together over there? Like, what are we doing wrong? And the reason I say that is because I would be thinking this thought while I'm standing in the living room of our house that is an absolute chaos as we're trying to get our 2 daughters off to school. Weekends were no different with this family. The husband and wife and their 2 kids, and they had a golden retriever. They'd be out doing the landscaping, and it was like watching a ballet or something. There was just like this well-oiled orchestration of how they all worked together, and it was just like a Norman Rockwell painting. And I remember, watching them and thinking, man, my life sucks compared to theirs. Because from my perspective, our life looked more like the cookie that the lady made on that video, and their life looked more like the cookie that was on the tutorial. It was all perfect. Have you ever experienced something like that or done that? You've ever looked at someone else's life, someone that maybe you don't know very well. Maybe it's that mom that you see in the parking lot at the school when you're dropping your kids off, and they just look like they're just put together and they've got it going on, and you're sitting there and you start comparing your life to theirs and thinking, what am I doing wrong? Because my kids are freaking out all the time, and they just get out and they all seem so happy. You ever done that? Just me? Well, here, the key word in all of that is assumed. And I won't tell you what it means because we all know what it means and does, right? But I say that because that's exactly what my wife Lori and I were doing with the family across the street. We were making assumptions about them based on what we were observing, and we came to all these conclusions and told ourselves all these stories, and just like, what were we doing wrong? Like, why were things going the way they were with us? But here's the thing. Over time, we got to know this family quite well, actually. And I remember it was a couple of months after meeting them and talking. We were getting a little more comfortable with our conversation. And I remember saying to them, I said, I got to be honest with you. I said, when we first saw you guys, I would watch from our house. That was a complete, mess. There was toys everywhere. There was laundry piled up. There was dishes in the sink. The dog was barking. The kids were screaming. And I told him, I said, I'd look across the street at your house, and it just looked so calm and peaceful and serene. And I would think, what are we doing wrong? And they started laughing at me, which I thought was kind of rude. And they said, no, the reason we're laughing is we do the exact same thing. Our kids will be running around screaming and fighting with each other. The dog's barking. There's crumbs on the floor. The laundry's piled high. And we would go into our living room and look across the street at your house and go, look how nice and calm and serene it is over there. What are we doing wrong? I know I'm not alone in this. I know you're identifying with this at some level. But it's so easy to do, isn't it? Just assume something about someone based on things we see or read or hear. And it's so easy, in fact, I would suggest that we do it with the Christmas story. And here's what I mean. What thoughts come to mind for you when you think of the Christmas story, but in particular, Mary? What thoughts come to mind when you think of Mary? I'll share some of mine. When I think about Mary and the fact that out of all the people in history, she was the one chosen by God to carry his child, I can't help but think it's because she never did anything wrong. You know, she always did what her parents said, you know, without complaining or arguing. You'd be like, Mary, clean your room. Okay. Mary, do the dishes. Okay. Mary, you know, go feed the camel. Okay, right? She never spoke an unkind word about anybody. She never gossiped or talked behind her friends' backs, anything like that. She ate her vegetables every meal. In other words, she had it all together. She was like the poster child of teenagers, the one we all dream about. And if you looked up the word perfect, there would be Mary's picture. Okay, those are just some of the thoughts I have when I think about Mary, and maybe you have some similar ones or maybe not. But it's understandable, isn't it? And here we are 2,000 years later, and Mary has since been canonized, which is, you know, made into a saint. She's been given that privilege, and maybe that's as it should be. She should be honored because she did, in fact, carry God's Son and raise him. But, and here's the question for me that I asked was Mary this perfect teenage Jewish girl who had it all together and did everything perfectly? Is that why the angel came to her and said, hey, Mary, you have found favor with God? You know, we don't know a lot about Mary. In fact, if you took all the things that were written about her in the Bible, you would have a hard time putting together any kind of a biography. But we do know a few things. We know that she was born and raised in Nazareth, a Galilean town of about 1,600 people, mostly made up of peasants. Nazareth was not a town that you would want to be from. Like if somebody said, hey, where are you from? You wouldn't stand up and say, hey, I'm from Nazareth. I mean, listen to these words found in the Bible about Nazareth. It kind of speaks to its reputation. Listen to these words. Nazareth? Can anything good come from Nazareth? Right? So that's kind of it was that place that was on the other side of the tracks. And so from that, we know Mary wasn't from royalty. There's no royalty living there, which meant she wasn't living in a palace. She didn't have any political power or position. She had no great accomplishment. She had nothing on her resume that would make her stand out. She wasn't overly educated, which kind of raises the question, well, if that's the case, then who was she to raise God's Son? Now, we do know she was engaged to be married to a simple carpenter, not some political figurehead or a king or ruler. At the end of the day, Mary was like every other Jewish peasant girl in Nazareth, simply living out an ordinary life in a not so great town, who had hopes and dreams and aspirations and worries and concerns. There's a pastor and author, his name's Kent Hughes, and he describes Mary's likely future had the angel not come and visited her on that particular night. And this comes from an article that he wrote called "Christmas is for the Poor and Humble." Listen to this. He writes this: "From all indicators, Mary's life would not be extraordinary. She would marry humbly, give birth to numerous poor children, never travel further than a few miles from home, and one day die like thousands of others before her, a nobody in a nothing town in the middle of nowhere." And yet, despite all of that, Mary is chosen by God to carry, give birth, and raise Jesus. Now that tells us something about Mary and her history, but it actually tells us more about God, which is what this series Who is all about, and more this adventure that we embarked on last week. It's going to take us right up till Easter, with the underlying goal there, the overarching goal to be for all of us to get to know Jesus better than we currently do, whatever that looks like for you. Maybe you're getting to know him for the first time. Maybe you've considered yourself a Jesus follower your whole life, and just getting to know and understand him better than we currently do. You know, for most of us, it's easy to just jump to the conclusion that when God is up to something, when he was going to work, so to speak, he tends to work through the powerful, the wealthy, the influential, those people that kind of have life figured out and in order. But the opposite is actually more true. Yes, he can work through the powerful and the wealthy, and he often does. But it's more true the other way. And the Christmas story is a great reminder of that reality. Mary, you have found favor with God. Most interpret those words from the angel that night to mean that Mary was given a special calling by God, which I think is true. But it doesn't answer the question why. Why was she given a special calling? Because there was nothing obvious about Mary that warranted any kind of favor from God. And if you think about it, the Christmas story, the incarnation, which is what it's about, it's the act of God stepping across time and space to come to this spinning piece of rock and to put meat on, which is what incarnation is. To take on flesh and blood and bone. So if that's true, Christmas is arguably the most significant event in human history. And so you would think, wouldn't this be the time to be really, 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 really picky about who you're going to get to carry you as you come to this world? And so the question remains, why Mary? What was it about her that caught God's attention and drew his favor? Well, I'm going to throw this out there for you to think about, kind of roll around. And as you think about the idea of this, here's what I think it is, okay? I think you can define it you can sum it up in two words. Why God would choose Mary, or why he chose Mary. And it was humble obedience. Humble obedience. As you think about that, her humble obedience possibly being the thing that caught God's attention and drew him in and his favor, just think about that as I read what happened the night the angel came to Mary. Okay? So to set up the scene, Mary's now engaged to Joseph. She's all happy. She goes home. Things are looking up. And all of a sudden, she's probably getting ready for bed. And all of a sudden, this bright light shines in her room. And she hears a voice. And obviously, she's freaked out because the first words we hear she hears, is, "Don't be afraid, Mary. For you have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will name him Jesus. He will be very great, and he will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his ancestor David, and he will reign over Israel forever. His kingdom will never end. Mary, like you and I probably would have been, was perplexed. It's like, it doesn't make any sense. So Mary asked the angel, how can this happen? I'm a virgin. And the angel replied, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the baby to be born will be holy, and he will be called the Son of God. And Mary responded, I am the Lord's servant. May everything you have said about me come true. The angel said Mary had found favor with God. I don't know what comes to mind for you when you hear those words, favor with God. A lot of people tend to think that being favored by God means being blessed, which it does. But for a lot of people, the proof of God's favor in your life is a great life. One with very few problems, and financial worries are almost non-existent. Things are just happening. Everything you do just turns out. But as we can see, that certainly wasn't the case for Mary. God's favor certainly didn't result in Mary's problems disappearing or being solved. In fact, when news about her being pregnant got out, it would have actually made life harder for Mary. Being pregnant and unmarried in her culture would have resulted in Mary possibly being, on the extreme side of it, being stoned to death, but at very least disowned by her family and ostracized and outcast by her community. She would have been the talk of the town. Everyone's like, hey, did you hear about Mary? Back and forth, right? Yet despite those realities, she responded with humble obedience. I am the Lord's servant. May everything you have said about me come true. In other words, I don't know what you've got planned, God, but it's okay. I'm here. Lead the way. I am the Lord's servant. A better translation might be slave. And then as now, being a slave, a servant, to be somebody who surrendered your will and submit yourself to another person was, back then, it was considered extremely shameful, unthinkable. It was the most humiliating thing you could do. But that's exactly what Mary does. She responds in humble obedience by calling herself a servant of God, willing to do whatever was asked by the Master. Over and over again, the Bible talks about humility and teaches that humility, more than anything else, is the thing that catches God's attention and tends to draw his favor. Listen to these words from the Old Testament, written by a guy named Isaiah. He was a prophet. Prophet was just simply a spokesperson for God. God would come to these chosen people and he would say, I need you to tell these people this thing, whatever that happened to be. Sometimes it was great news. Sometimes it wasn't so good news. Sometimes it was just say something. Here's what God said through Isaiah to the people. He said, these are the ones I look on with favor, those who are humble and contrite in spirit and who tremble at my word. In the Old Testament, there's a book called Proverbs. If you've never read it, it's a fantastic book. It's filled with all these little pithy statements. They're short and to the point, and they're full of wisdom, and it's called Proverbs. And here's what Proverbs has to say around this whole dynamic of humility and pride and how God fits into it. And it says this: God opposes the proud, but he gives grace, favor to the humble. God lifts up the humble, not the impressive or the put together or the powerful. He lifts up and draws close to the humble, the contrite in spirit. Man, it can be so easy to look at Mary's life and compare our life to hers and convince ourselves that our life, the reason our life is hard and messy and complicated and full of problems and struggles is because I don't have God's favor. And the reason I don't have God's favor is because I don't have it all together. And so what do? And here's this conundrum we find ourselves falling into. We figure we don't have God's favor because we don't have it all together. So what do? We go out and we try and do all the right things and avoid all the wrong things in order to get God's favor. And if life doesn't get better or easier, we just figure it's because we're still doing something wrong. God's upset, he's mad, whatever it happens to be. And so what do? We go and try harder. You know, you hear it like that, and you think, well, that's just ridiculous, if not exhausting. And it's both. It's both. But thankfully, it's the furthest thing from the truth. If you're going to take anything from this message, maybe you're, chasing your kids around or whatever. If you're going to take anything from this message this morning, I hope it's this. You and I do not have to have it all together in order to get God's attention, to experience his grace, his favor, his mercy, his love, his acceptance, his forgiveness. Yeah, if you continue reading through the Christmas story, you'll come to a song that Mary wrote in response to everything that had happened up until that point. Today it's commonly referred to as the Magnificat or the Song of Mary, and countless people have sung this over the millennia. But here's what she wrote. Listen to this, and there's going to be a few things that we'll highlight here. It says, all this stuff that's happening, so she's pregnant, out of wedlock, all that stuff's going on, and she says, oh, how my soul praises the Lord, how my spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. Don't miss this part. For he took notice of who? A lowly servant girl. Not a princess, not a queen, not somebody in political power. A lowly servant girl. And from now on, all generations will call me blessed. For the mighty one is holy, and he has done great things for me. He shows mercy from generation to generation to all who fear, to all who stand in awe of him. His arm has done tremendous things. And then listen to this. He has scattered who? The proud and haughty ones. He has brought down princes from their thrones and exalted, lift up, drawn into the humble. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away with empty hands. He has helped his servant Israel and remembered to be merciful. For he made this promise to our ancestors, to Abraham and his children forever, that one day, that promise is that one day he would come and set everyone free. Mary wasn't perfect. She didn't know everything. She didn't understand all that the angel had told her that day. Just like you and me, Mary was prone to doubt and worry and fear. The only thing Mary knew was that the child inside of her was no ordinary child. She knew from the depths of her being that this child that she would raise would save people, including herself, from their sins. Hence the name Jesus, which means the one who saves. Mary could see the upside-down nature of God's kingdom and see how it doesn't wind first through princes and palaces, but it comes among those who are humble enough to receive Jesus' gift of grace. And it is a gift. It's given freely. You can't earn it. His mercy, His love, and His forgiveness. You know, maybe you're tuning in this morning, and for you, when you look at your life and you compare it to others, your cracks, your flaws, your weaknesses, all the things that you're struggling with, whether it be financial or relational, those are the first things you see. And if that describes you, I hope that Mary's story would be a reminder that those are not the things that God sees when He looks at you. And that you would be encouraged, because God has always chosen to work through less than perfect people to accomplish His purposes on earth. Always. All He is looking for is a humble heart, one that is open to believe Him, to trust Him as best we can in that moment, and then follow. God always chooses to work through less than perfect people. People like Mary, people like me, people like you. Really glad that I get to be on this journey with you and that you tuned in this morning. I invite you to pray. God, it can be so easy to figure that all the issues that are cropping up for us in our life, whether they're big or small, whatever it happens to be, financial, relational, physical, that somehow you're not seeing us, and we try desperately to kind of get things set right, and so we run off on this trail trying to get things right, when in and of ourselves we'll never get it right. We'll never be able to earn a way back to you, or earn your favor, or get your attention. We just simply need to say, I can't do this. I need you to help me. The most honest prayer we can pray is, God, help me. That is what catches your ear. Because it's a prayer that's full of humility. And so I just pray for each of us, where pride has us kind of locked up, that you would just begin to chip away at that. And we could get to the place where we just say, thank you for the Christmas story, and see ourselves in it. And we pray this in your awesome name. Amen.